Okay, spoilers time people. I'm only going to say this once because the title of the video should make this pretty damn obvious, but this video will contain spoilers. It'll contain spoilers through the manga up to chapter 61.5. If you haven't read up to that and don't want to be spoiled, please exit now. So I usually stick to anime-related videos, not so much manga, but today I have an interesting question I wanted to ponder. Is Kunikida dead? In the most recent chapter of the Bungou Stray Dogs manga, Kunikida fell out of a helicopter and exploded. But did he actually die? In order to determine this, I'm going to look at this from two directions. First, in-universe, in other words, is there a practical way that he could have survived? And secondly, out-universe, in other words, would the writer be actually likely to kill him off? So let's jump right into the first part and have a look at the canon. Firstly, is there any obvious way that he could have survived? Kunikida jumped off the plane, grabbed the person who was attacking said aircraft, and blew them both up. Well, there are three obvious mechanisms I can see for keeping Kunikida alive. The most obvious, of course, is Yosano's ability. Thou shalt not die, an ability which allows her to save anyone on the brink of death, is something that is kind of a catch-all for Bungou Stray Dogs and has been responsible for keeping everyone alive until now. Is Yosano's ability strong enough to save Kunikida? Absolutely. For one thing, Yosano herself gets blown up during the Lemon Balmer arc, thus being the introduction for her ability, and secondly, and more importantly, Kunikida has actually been blown up before, and again, saved by Yosano. So we've already established that he can and will get blown up without any lasting consequences because of this ability. However, this in no way guarantees his survival, for a few reasons. The first, of course, being that Yosano may not have had a chance to use her ability on him. See, this calls for an examination of range and time-lapse. In other words, how far away can someone be for Yosano to use her ability on them, and how quickly does she have to use their ability? We know a bit about both. Earlier in this same arc, the characters get out of being sleep-gassed by essentially committing suicide. They all inflict fatal injuries on themselves, relying on the fact that there is a margin of time and a margin of error between when someone's life signs start to fade and when their heart and brain actually dies. They used that to falsify scans showing that they were dead, resulting in the fact that they didn't get sleep-gassed, so that Yosano's ability could pull them back at the last second. So we know there is a little bit of wiggle room on the time there. However, this also implies that she can't resurrect people after the fact. The minute those life signs are finally gone, the minute their brain and hearts fully stop, that's it, it's game over. The bigger issue is distance. What's Yosano's range? We don't know that it's particularly large. On one hand, during the aforementioned incident, Yosano was not, as far as I'm aware, in physical contact with everyone she was reviving, so she doesn't actually have to be in physical contact. But we have no reason to believe that she has any sort of range on her ability. Even if it isn't actually physical contact, it still seems, as far as we know, that she has to be right there, and she was, by that standard, well too far away from Kunikida to save him. Moreover, no matter how quickly she gets back to the ground, the fact that he was blown to smithereens would mean that she would be unable to use her ability. Could there be a loophole in there that I can't find? Yes. But right now, Yosano's ability isn't looking like a great way to save him. There are, however, two other abilities that could come into play here. The first belongs to Chuya. Chuya's presence, on an aircraft no less, could alter things tremendously. Now, there is always the possibility that Chuya could use his ability to somehow deal with the force of the blast, or keep Kunikida from dying on contact with the ground if he didn't die from the blast. But there's also a problem with this, which is that as far as we can tell, Kunikida has to come into physical contact with something before he can use his gravity ability on it. The only exception being when he's using Tainted and creating black holes, and of course he can't use for the Tainted Sorrow without Dazai present, so there's no way in hell that's going to happen. Even so, there's still a chance here because Kunikida could use his ability in combination with Yosano to defeat the problem of range. See, Kunikida probably won't die initially from the blast. We've seen explosives like this before. Hell, Kunikida was blown up by explosives of roughly the same caliber before, and there was a moment in which he did not die that Yosano saved him. Therefore, he's not going to be blown to smithereens. The blast is going to be bad enough to damage internal organs or something, but it won't be enough to actively blow him to so many pieces that there's no chance for Yosano to save him. Therefore, the issue is if Yosano can get there before the blast becomes fatal. And that's where Chuya comes in. Kunikida is well outside Chuya's range, but Yusano, who is on the same aircraft with him, is not. Using his gravity manipulation ability, Chuya could probably get Yusano back to the ground fast enough without damaging her that she could get there in time to save Kunikida. This would require two things: incredibly fast action on Chuya's part and a full understanding by him of Yusano's ability. We don't know if either of these will come into play, but it is a possibility. The final possibility for saving Kunikida lies in our unknown ability user. The character who Kunikida is trying to blow up is one of the hunting dogs sent after the agency. However, there's another hunting dog down on the ground. Now, I'm not remembering either of their names off the top of my head, so you'll have to forgive me on that, but we've seen the ability of the hunting dog Kunikida is trying to kill. However, we have not seen the ability of the one down on the ground, and this gives us an opportunity. With an unknown ability user present, this ability user has a chance to in some way neutralize the situation that we can't predict. Sure, there's no reason for him to save Kunikida, and sure, he clearly hates his partner, but that doesn't mean he won't save said partner for some reason along the lines of, "I would get in trouble if I let you die," or some such. Furthermore, the mangaka has actually used a mechanism like this before to save a character from blowing up in a helicopter, mainly Kyoka back at the end of the Guild Wars arc when she was saved by joining the agency, an act which brought her under the control of Fukuzawa's ability. So there is certainly precedent for the mangaka to pull something like that. And speaking of precedent, let's look at the second part of this. Will the mangaka kill off Kunikida? Because at the end of the day, that's the biggest issue. Now that we've established that, yes, there are ways that the mangaka could in fact keep him alive without breaking the narrative, the question becomes, will the mangaka take them? To determine this, the only thing we can do is look at precedent. And while that doesn't necessarily guarantee a series' future, it's something at least. So let's have a look at the precedent. There are some things against and some things for. Let's look at the against first. That is, character death. That is, there isn't really a lot of it in Bungou Stray Dogs. Up until this point in the series, we have had exactly one, and only one, protagonist death in the entire series, that being Oda Sakanosuke in the Dark Era light novel. Or in the anime if you follow that. But the point is, Oda's death doesn't actually set up much of a precedent for something like this because Oda was always a character set up with the express purpose of killing him off. Oda's death came at the end of the Dark Era light novel, which he was the narrator for, but we knew from the beginning that one of the three main characters, and obviously not Dazai since he's the main character from the main series, was going to die. And more to the point, Oda falls under what I like to refer to as the backstory rule. Even if Dark Era works as a standalone story, and honestly, you should totally go read or watch it even if you haven't the rest of the series because it is a fabulous standalone story, the point is that it is still essentially backstory, Dazai's backstory. And even shows that do not kill, period, end of story, have backstory deaths. Look at how even Fairy Tail has backstory deaths, and no one can ever die in that show, ever. So the fact that a character like Oda can die to create a tragic backstory doesn't actually give us any precedent for saying that a major character will die currently or going forward. And the fact that Oda was the only character death suggests that Bungou Stray Dogs is the sort of story that does not kill off main characters. There's only one argument that I would use to counter that, and that is this given arc. Mainly that this given arc has already broken precedent many times. The current arc of the manga is very different from any other arc that's come before it. Every arc has a set villain, and the story revolves around taking down that villain. We have Octagawa and the Port Mafia in the first arc, we have the Azure Messenger in that light novel, we have Mimic in that light novel, we have the Guild in the Guild Wars arc. Now, granted, this isn't the series where villains appear and disappear and then we go back to the status quo, only to re-loop the thing. All of the antagonists build on one another. The only reason that the Port Mafia and Octagawa are even after Atsushi is because they want to collect the bounty put on him by the guild, and at the end of the Guild Wars arc, Dostoevsky comes in and blows up the Moby Dick even after the main characters thought they'd override the self-destruct. But despite these overarching narrative flows, the fact is that all the arcs are fairly self-contained, and this one isn't. Hell, you could break this arc up into 4 separate arcs. Set up Cannibalism, The Perfect Crime and Criminal, and the current one, which I guess you could call Complete Destruction of the Armed Detective Agency, or Destruction for short. Throughout this arc, we are constantly getting introduced to new criminal groups or other antagonist groups for our main characters, and they're just building instead of having them taken out. We started with this being an arc about the rats through the houses of the dead, only to find out that they are actually a subset of the decay of angels, only to also find out about a split between the government, only to also be introduced to these hunting dogs. The result is that this whole arc is feeling bigger and undertaking far more than any of the previous arcs, which is why I think a death here might be possible despite the lack of precedent, especially because there is even more precedent for breaking precedent in this arc. And that is the death of Gogol. Gogol was introduced as a main antagonist. Besides Dostoevsky, he is our big introduction to the decay of angels, and especially since we didn't even know Dostoevsky was part of angels until Gogol told us, Gogol becomes the face of the decay of angels. He shows up, he's incredibly flamboyant, he's a huge deal, and then he just dies. This is the first time we've had an antagonist death like this either, so again, this arc shows that it's capable of firsts and going a lot darker and a lot killier than any arc that's come before it. Finally, there's one last thing I want to analyze, and that is Kunikida's backstory and current arc up until now. That is, when he's first introduced, Kunikida takes on the role as a foil for Dazai. Then we get, at least in the anime, the Azure Messenger, and that whole arc, an arc which establishes him as a three-dimensional fleshed-out individual character apart from his relationship with Dazai. After that, he takes on major supporting cast. Kunikida's a big character and he's fleshed out and all that, but he's never the central focus of the narrative. However, over the last arc, he has become incredibly developed and rounded out, and the arc has spent a lot of time on his character and his development. Constantly challenging his beliefs and his ideal system, he's struggled constantly within his ideals to balance his need to protect the agency and Fukuzawa with his need to kill in order to do that. He's watched as a little kid blew up in front of his face and he was unable to save her, ended up in prison for being framed for that murder, and overall has just been through a hell of a lot emotionally. This led him to constantly have his ideals torn apart, something further symbolized by the fact that the antagonist, who he just blew up, quite literally tore his ideals book apart. Kunikida has had it pretty damn rough lately, and jumping off of the helicopter to blow up this guy, and in doing so shouting about his ideals, is this culmination of his arc, the way he struggled, and at the end of the day, he is going to uphold his ideals no matter what. They aren't something that can just be destroyed or taken away from him, and he will uphold them even if it means his death. Looked at this way from a narrative and writing perspective, this is the perfect time, narratively speaking, to kill off Kunikida, at the height of his character arc, after having undergone this revelation. So I feel that Kunikida's arc throughout this arc is another argument for his death. However, the counter-argument to that goes back again to Kyoka, who went through a similar bout of self-realization in her arc, and finally determining to die for her beliefs, only again to be saved by an unknown ability. So, having looked at precedent, narrative structure, and the rules of the universe, will Kunikida die? Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. On one hand, I don't think so because, again, the structure of Bungou Stray Dogs until now has set up this feeling that characters aren't actually going to get killed off. On the other hand, I don't know. There does seem to be a lot of evidence for him dying and not a huge amount of evidence for him being saved, so I won't be shocked if he is dead. Sad, yeah, but not necessarily shocked. And now that I've spent 14 minutes speculating without giving you a solid answer to the question I raised at the beginning of this video, please feel free to continue arguing about this down in the comments. That said, if you've already read the new manga chapter, since I know that it's out already in Japan even if it isn't in English over in the West yet, please don't spoil. If you want to hear me talk more about Bungou Stray Dogs, check out my Literary Heroes video on Louisa May Alcott or my breakdown of the second OP. If you enjoyed this sort of speculative breakdown video, please like and subscribe and let me know down in the comments. This is Coriander Stone, and I thank you for watching. L. Sai Kangru.